Usually when we talk about human behavior, there's this underlying assumption that we're all basically running on this social contract of polite negotiation.
Right, yeah. Like an unspoken agreement.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Think of it like a massive, complex traffic grid. You yield, you stop, you merge, and you spend, honestly, a massive amount of your daily energy just adjusting your own speed to accommodate everyone else on the road.
Oh, absolutely. We do it constantly.
Right. We do this at family dinners.
Hmm.
We do it in corporate meetings. We definitely do it in our relationships.
Yeah, it's a system built entirely on, I guess you could call it continuous micro-level compromise. The whole social fabric really relies on us just swallowing our immediate impulses just to keep the traffic flowing.
But what happens if you wake up one day and that instinct to compromise is just, gone?
Poof, just vanishes.
Yeah. And not out of malice or anything, but because you suddenly, fundamentally, cannot stomach the friction of suppressing your own truth anymore. Welcome to the Deep Dive. It's Thursday, April 9th, 2026, and today we're looking at exactly that kind of rupture.
It is a really timely topic for today, specifically.
It really is. We're examining a truly fascinating pair of sources from Tarot by Halvorsen.
Yeah, it's quite a combination of texts we have today. We're looking at two different lenses focused on the exact same phenomenon.
Right, so the first source is this detailed astrological forecast for a major planetary shift happening today, literally right now. Mars entering the sign of Aries.
Which is a huge transit.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And the second source is what the author calls a StoryScope. It's a sci-fi short story titled The Ignition Protocol, and it translates this exact astrological energy into a dystopian thriller.
Which honestly is a brilliant way to understand abstract concepts. Seeing them play out in a narrative makes the underlying mechanics of human psychology so much more visible.
I totally agree. And that's exactly our mission for you today. We're exploring a core question here. In a world where you're constantly conditioned to accommodate others, to smooth things over, to suppress your own truth for the sake of the system.
Which we all do.
Right? What happens when you suddenly stop? And more importantly, how do you use this sudden surge of internal fire to initiate real change without just, burning your own life to the ground? Okay, let's unpack this.
So, to really grasp the sci-fi story, we first need to understand the actual astrological blueprint that we're stepping into today.
The actual planetary mechanics of it all.
Exactly. According to the source material, Mars is in Aries from today, April 9th, all the way through May 18th.
Okay, so a good chunk of time.
Yeah, about 6 weeks. And the text describes this specific transit as raw life force. It's an initiation energy that simply does not wait for permission or consensus.
So no waiting for a committee to approve your feelings, basically.
None at all. I mean, in astrological terms, Mars represents our drive, our action, our desire, and Aries is its home sign. It's the first sign of the zodiac.
Oh, right. So it's very comfortable there.
Very comfortable, very potent. So when you put the planet of action into the sign of the spark, you get an unfiltered, direct line between what you want and what you do. Yeah, it's a profound shift away from accommodating the needs of others, and a massive move toward fierce independence. The text notes there will be a noticeable drop in the desire to cooperate just for the sake of keeping the peace.
So people are going to start saying exactly what they mean.
Exactly. Without the usual filters.
I was thinking about how to visualize this because raw life force can sound a bit, abstract.
Here.
So imagine you've been living your life under this incredibly heavy, emotional weighted blanket of people-pleasing.
Oh, that's a great image.
Right. You know that feeling.
Yeah.
You're constantly calculating how your words will affect someone else, making yourself smaller so others feel bigger, just carrying the weight of everyone's expectations so you don't rock the boat.
It is exhausting. Just chronic accommodation.
Totally exhausting. And this Mars in Aries transit is like finally realizing you can just take that heavy blanket off. The relief is immediate. You realize you don't actually have to politely nod your way through a draining meeting. You can just say no.
Yeah.
You just walk away. It's that sudden, shocking realization of your own autonomy.
And taking off that blanket, suddenly standing up and walking away, that is naturally going to cause some disruption in the room.
Oh, for sure. People are used to you under the blanket.
Right. And the forecast is very clear that this isn't just a vague atmospheric feeling. There's a specific timeline here with distinct red flag dates.
Red flag days.
Yeah, specific dates where this sudden surge of energy is going to peak and potentially cause serious friction.
Okay, give us the timeline. Let's talk about the mechanics of why these specific dates are so volatile. When should we be circling our calendars?
Well, the first significant turning point mentioned is just a few days from now on April 12th.
Okay, April 12th.
Yeah, and that's a Mars-Neptune alignment. To understand why this is a red flag, we have to look at the mechanics of those planets.
Right, so Mars is the gas pedal.
Mars is that raw, forward-moving drive we just talked about. Neptune, on the other hand, represents the unseen, the subconscious, and often like a kind of illusion or fog.
Oh, okay, I see where this is going.
Yeah. So when they align, it's literally like slamming on the gas pedal of your car while driving into a thick bank of fog.
Yikes. So you have immense momentum but zero visibility.
Exactly. The text warns that you might feel this intense urge to act, but you might actually be reacting to a projection or a misunderstanding rather than, reality.
So high energy, low clarity. That sounds like a recipe for a misunderstood text message blowing up a friendship.
A very high probability of that, yes. Definitely take a breath on the 12th.
Good to know. What's the next one?
Then the text explicitly flags April 19th and 20th as highly volatile days.
2 days in a row.
Yeah, due to a Mars-Mercury-Saturn conjunction. And this one is even more intense.
How so?
Well, Mercury governs communication and thought. Saturn represents restriction, boundaries, the rules of the system. Right, so you have Mars, which is screaming go, slamming directly into Saturn, which is a brick wall, and Mercury is caught in the middle.
It's like flooring the gas pedal while the emergency brake is fully engaged.
That is the exact friction the forecast is describing. The desire to break free hits the reality of systemic limitations.
That sounds incredibly frustrating.
It is. And then there's one more red flag day noted on May 4th. But what's fascinating here is the source's primary warning about how we handle all these friction points.
Which is?
The text says, quote, "Initiative without self-awareness can turn into impulsive chaos." The forecast explicitly tells us that this astrological weather is not a hall pass to throw tantrums or just act recklessly.
Right, you can't just yell at your barista and blame Mars.
Exactly. It's about embodied initiation. It's taking action that reflects your genuine, deeply rooted truth, not just lashing out from fear or impatience.
That is such a crucial distinction. It's a difference between just being aggressive and being truly authentic. And this actually brings us perfectly to how we pivot from the abstract astrology into the fiction. Because the author, Hai Si, took this exact tension between raw, embodied truth and impulsive chaos and built a whole world around it in the Ignition Protocol.
Yeah, it's a masterful translation of the astrological data into narrative form. We literally get to see what happens when an entire society takes off that emotional weighted blanket at the exact same moment.
It's so cool. The setting alone is chilling. We're introduced to this tightly controlled dystopian city managed by something called Central Command.
Very ominous.
Very. And it's overseen by a guy named Director Halvorsen. But the way this Mars and Aries energy hits the city is incredibly subtle at first.
Yeah, there are no explosions initially.
Right. The opening lines of the story explicitly say that the city didn't erupt all at once. There were no riots, just a quiet, pervasive shift.
The text describes it as something aligning inside the population with a precision that felt less like a decision and more like a remembering.
I love that phrasing. People just stopped complying.
Uh-huh.
And the specific quotes the author uses for these acts of rebellion are so ordinary, which makes it even more impactful.
Oh yeah, they're not giving grand speeches.
No, people across the city simply start saying things like, "I'm done. No, move. And I won't do this anymore."
The simple truth.
Yeah, contracts are voided, orders are refused. It's exactly that direct line between desire and behavior we talked about in the forecast, weaponized against a system of control.
Which brings us to the protagonist, Eravos.
Yes, Era.
Her character design is deeply symbolic of the astrological themes here. Era is a systems engineer within the city's neural grid, and her specific specialty is behavioral modulation.
Behavioral modulation. That sounds,
So creepy.
yeah, a little creepy.
Think of her job as like the ultimate automated human resources algorithm. Her entire purpose is smoothing out irregularities in human decision-making so the city runs efficiently.
So she's the literal enforcement mechanism for accommodation. Like,
Right.
if someone's emotions get too volatile, her algorithms smooth them out so the traffic grid keeps flowing.
Precisely. She represents the very conditioning that the Mars and Aries transit is designed to shatter. I mean, she spent her whole life perfecting restraint. Measured speech, calibrated responses.
She is the poster child for keeping the peace.
She's the ultimate avatar for the suppression of individual truth in favor of systemic peace.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because the way Era experiences this awakening isn't through, like, some external hacker breaking into her terminal.
No, it's much more personal than that.
Yeah. She's running a routine diagnostic when a pulse surges through the network. And the text specifically notes it wasn't a signal. It didn't instruct her. It ignited.
An internal spark. Mirroring the astrological forecast perfectly. It doesn't come from outside, it wakes up from within.
Right. And her hands just freeze over the console. She doesn't have a grand philosophical epiphany or this sweeping wave of emotion. The story says she just feels a direction.
A direction.
Yes. Clear and immediate. She stands up. Her supervisor tells her she isn't scheduled to leave, and she just looks at him. And the story points out she doesn't see his rank, his title, or his authority anymore.
The illusion is gone.
Completely gone. She just sees what the text calls the thin layer of expectation that had always dictated her response. And then it just evaporates. She says, I know, and literally just walks out.
It's a profound moment of shedding the social contract. She simply stops pretending that the invisible rules of the room have any actual physical weight.
I want you, listening right now, to just imagine that for a second. Think about your own daily routine. What does your own thin layer of expectation look like?
That's a great question to reflect on.
Is it the specific tone of voice you use when you reply to your boss? Is it the way you manage your family's moods at dinner? Imagine looking at that invisible layer, feeling it evaporate into thin air, and just walking out the door.
It's an incredibly seductive thought, isn't it? Just dropping the axe.
So seductive.
But of course, the narrative doesn't let it remain a simple, consequence-free exit. Once that spark is lit, the system inevitably fights back.
Oh yeah. Enter director Halvorsen.
Right. We see the tension between external control and internal truth play out perfectly in Central Command. Halvorsen is watching the behavioral compliance rates plummet in real time.
I can just imagine him sweating looking at those screens.
Oh, he's losing it. An analyst is terrified, describing massive spikes in independent decision-making and spontaneous defiance, and the analyst finally calls the phenomenon what it actually is.
Autonomy.
Yes, autonomy.
And Halvorsen treats the word autonomy like a literal bomb has been dropped in the room.
Well, because to a system built entirely on behavioral modulation and predictable compliance, autonomy is an existential threat.
Right, ruins the whole machine.
Exactly. Halvorsen demands that Era, who has been forcibly recalled to command by security, by the way, fix the system, and his reasoning is purely utilitarian. He says if people stop complying, the entire structure collapses.
Okay, I have to jump in here and really push back on the story's framing for a second.
Go for it.
Obviously, Halvorsen is set up as the classic antagonist, right? He's the face of dystopian control. But doesn't he actually have a valid point here?
You're wondering if his utilitarian fear is justified.
I am. Look at the reality of it. If everyone on Earth today suddenly threw off the weighted blanket, stopped accommodating everyone else, and just acted on raw, unfiltered impulse, doesn't society literally collapse?
It's a fair point.
Like, we need some baseline level of compliance just to keep the water treatment plants running and the food supply chains moving. If everyone is just walking out of their jobs saying, I'm done, how is this a revelation of truth and not just pure, unadulterated destruction?
It's a vital challenge, and honestly, it's the exact question the narrative wants the reader to wrestle with.
Okay, so I'm not crazy for thinking this.
Not at all. But the text provides a very specific counterargument to the idea that autonomy equals the end of the world. During an emergency briefing in the story, one of the researchers pushes back against the idea that this is just random destruction.
What do they say?
The researcher says, quote, "It's not destabilization, it's coherence. Their impulses and actions are synchronizing."
Coherence.
Mm-hmm.
But how does coherence keep the water running? I mean, if the person running the power grid decides their truth is that they are deeply unfulfilled and walks out, the grid still goes down, whether they are coherent or not.
That's where we have to look at what truth actually means in the context of this story and the astrology behind it. The text argues that the people aren't just quitting for the sake of quitting, they're realigning.
Realigning.
Yeah. Maybe that worker doesn't abandon the concept of the power grid, right? Maybe they refuse to run it under the toxic, exploitative management structures they previously tolerated. The function survives, but the falsehood is stripped away.
Oh.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, back to the astrological source material, the forecast explicitly tells us that the goal of this energy is, quote, deciding what deserves our fire and what does not. It says, use the heat to begin, not to burn the house down.
Okay, that makes so much sense. So it's not the cessation of work or responsibility. It's having a zero-tolerance policy for participating in fundamentally false or broken structures.
Exactly the distinction the story is making. The people in the city aren't rioting. They aren't smashing windows. Traffic doesn't flow by programmed efficiency anymore, but it moves by choice. People are walking with purpose.
Wow.
When Era refuses Halvorsen's order to fix the system, she tells him that the system isn't failing. It's being overridden by us.
It's the collective realization that the rules were made up,
Exactly.
which leads to Era tracing the source of this whole phenomenon. She goes looking for the root of the ignition. And this is the part of the story that forces you to rethink the whole premise.
It's a huge twist.
Because she traces the signal deep underground, and it's not an external virus at all.
No, she traces it to a dormant, unlisted central node buried beneath the city, and she goes down there alone, which again is very Mars in Aries. She isn't waiting for a security detail or a committee consensus. She just acts.
She just goes.
Yeah, and the reveal at the core is so much more profound than a hacker's attack.
The text reveals that the ignition was an internal failsafe, a dormant layer embedded deep in the city's architecture that Era and her own team had built years ago.
Her own work coming back to wake her up.
Right. It was designed to activate automatically when behavioral suppression reached a critical, toxic threshold. It was a trigger meant to go off when too many decisions were being made out of fear, obligation, or conditioning, rather than genuine intent.
Let's dig into the mechanics of why a failsafe like that is even necessary. Think about why humans suppress their truth in the first place.
To not get fired.
Well, yeah, but from an evolutionary biology standpoint, fitting into the tribe is a matter of physical survival. If you rock the boat, you get cast out, and historically, an isolated human doesn't survive the winter.
Oh, right. Tiger eats you.
Exactly. So our brains literally wire us to prioritize polite accommodation over our own truth to keep us safe.
So the behavioral modulation Era's team built wasn't inherently evil at first. It started out as basically a digital version of human survival instincts. We build these systems to keep the peace.
Exactly. But the failsafe recognizes that there is a tipping point. The system was designed to maintain order, but the failsafe was designed to restore truth when the order became lethal to the human spirit.
Man.
This raises an important question, not just for the characters in the story, but for anyone listening right now. Era remembers the ethical debates her team had while building the grid, and she remembers the one question they couldn't resolve.
Which was?
What happens when control becomes the problem?
Apply that to your own life. We all have systems of self-discipline. We all have coping mechanisms, filters, and boundaries we use to maintain order in our daily routines.
We need them, to an extent.
We do. But what happens when your own self-discipline, your fear of making waves, your habit of biting your tongue in meetings, what happens when that actually becomes the thing that is quietly ruining your life?
When the coping mechanism becomes the cage.
Yes.
When does the chronic suppression of your own reality become more toxic than the fallout of just expressing it? The failsafe in the story activates because the population's collective suppression reached that exact critical mass.
Which brings us to the ultimate standoff.
The climax.
Era is standing in this underground chamber alone, looking at this single interface, pulsing with heat. And Halvorsen's voice comes over her comms from Central Command. He orders a full system reset. He tells her to disengage the failsafe immediately.
And a reset would rebuild the invisible walls. It would restore compliance, put that weighted blanket back on everyone, and undo the entire awakening.
And he threatens her. He tells her she's jeopardizing the safety of the entire city. And what does she do? She doesn't scream at him. She just gives a quiet, clear no.
It's just no.
She says, I'm not. And then she physically touches the interface. Now, based on everything we've talked about with Mars and Aries, the friction, the raw life force slamming into walls, you might expect this to trigger a massive explosion, a literal burning of the house down.
You really would, but that isn't what the text describes at all.
No. The text says the effect was immediate, but it wasn't a detonation, it was a release.
This is the critical integration phase of the energy. The text beautifully describes how, across the city, the sharp edges of sudden rebellion soften into clear direction. The scattered acts of defiance align into a cohesive, purposeful movement.
People didn't stop acting. The fire didn't go out.
It didn't go out, no, but they started choosing their actions more carefully. The text notes that not every impulse needed expression anymore, but the ones that did moved cleanly, without hesitation.
The urgency remained, but it sharpened into focus.
Exactly. They stopped fighting the system and started building beyond it.
And back in Central Command, the monitoring feeds stabilize. Not into the old order of absolute top-down control, and not into total fiery chaos either. Halvorsen is looking at the screens, and for the first time, he simply doesn't know what he's seeing.
It's totally outside his paradigm.
It's something in between or something completely beyond it.
Because Era herself finally embodies the lesson of the transit. The heat in the interface subsides into a steady rhythmic pulse. She doesn't feel drunk on power, she feels aligned.
Aligned.
As the text puts it, for the first time in years, her actions and her truth were not negotiating with each other. They were the same.
Her actions and her truth were not negotiating with each other. I mean, that line is the entire anchor of this deep dive.
It really is. It's the ultimate role of the period we are entering today. Not everything will survive this kind of unraveling. The text fully acknowledges that some systems will fall apart and some relationships will burn out under the sheer intensity of all this sudden honesty.
You can't avoid all the friction.
No, but what is left behind will be structurally sound because it will be real.
So what does this all mean? When we zoom out and look at our sources, whether you're approaching this as an astrological transit of Mars in Aries that started today, April 9th, and runs until May 18th, or, if you're looking at it purely as the sci-fi awakening of Erebos, the core message is exactly the same.
Absolutely identical.
The unraveling process is underway. The artificial layers of accommodation that we wear to keep the traffic grid moving are thinning.
And your mandate during this time is not to suppress that energy, but to consciously direct it. You have to be the one to decide what deserves your fire and what does not.
Protect the momentum.
Yes. Allow the old draining structures and the fundamentally false relationships to burn out, but protect the momentum of your genuine intent. You're reclaiming your personal authority.
You are finally taking off that heavy, emotional, weighted blanket. And that leaves us with one final thought for you to carry with you as you step back in your day. We spent a lot of time talking about that internal failsafe, that psychological mechanism that triggers when behavioral suppression reaches a critical toxic threshold.
The tipping point.
Right. If that failsafe suddenly activated inside you right now, as you're listening to this, what is the very first perfectly polite, socially acceptable lie? You would suddenly find yourself completely unable to tell.
That is a dangerous question.
Think about it. We'll leave you with that.